First, before we take up the subject of healing, let's answer these two questions. In view of there being one life, how can we justify taking life for food? There is only one life, and there are states and stages of that life. Just as the infant has no other life but that one, yet is on an entirely different level of consciousness than the adult. And so it is that animal life is also another form of that life, but so is vegetable life, a manifestation of that one life. Now, in the absolute spiritual consciousness, there is never a need for taking animal life for food. There is never any need for that. The only reason that we require meat today is because of a universal belief and the fact that our bodies have been built up on meat for a dozen or 1,000 generations behind us, and we are accustomed to meat. Now, you can be assured of this, that meat is not a necessity. I have recently spent 2 days with Mr. Hamlin in England, and he is a man of 82, and a man who must work at his work certainly not less than 12 hours a day, and probably mostly 13 or 14 hours a day, and is a very vigorous young man. And he hasn't had a bite of meat in 50 years. He lives entirely on vegetables, fruits, salads, nuts, cheese, dates, figs, and all of what we would call the natural foods, the foods of nature. And if vegetarianism can produce men like that, it's worthwhile following. But at least he is a proof, a living proof, that meat is not a necessity. And if I'm not mistaken, George Bernard Shaw was a vegetarian, and he was still physically and mentally all right at 90, showing that meat is not an absolute essential. If we fulfill universal belief by substituting those foods that give us the nourishment necessary for our bodies. The Master says we do not live by bread alone, but he doesn't say that we will eliminate bread. He says we will not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. And his own conduct is proof that food is a necessity. But if it is a necessity, it is not a necessity to gratify a desire. It is a necessity for the feeding of the body, just like truth is necessary for the feeding of the soul. Now, if, as is the case with us, that we come of generations of meat eaters, we will not find it a simple matter to give up the eating of meats, because there is a craving for it, there is a desire. The body has an actual hunger for it, and does not readily accept substitutes. But there are two ways, if a person wished, in which they could overcome their desire for meats. And one is to make a careful study, as Mr. Hamlin has, of those foods that substitute for meat: cheese, fruits, vegetables, nuts, raisins, dates, figs. And be willing to take a stand for a while on not eating meat until these other foods have taken its place. After that, meat would never be missed. And the other way is a growth in spiritual consciousness. The higher one develops in spiritual consciousness, the less they eat of meat. There are times when that development is so strong that it is an impossibility to eat meat. Then at other times it is possible to eat it, but not with any great relish or desire. And it's a very easy thing. In fact, it's a matter of preference to eat none of it or to eat very little of it, you see. Now, in either way, it can be achieved. Whether or not there is a moral issue is dependent upon one's viewpoint. If you get to the place of actually understanding God as the one life, then all the desire for that disappears, and one isn't bound to it any longer. You can eat it or leave it alone. In the case, for instance, of Oriental Swamis, they are brought up in India on strictly vegetarian lines, never touch meat at all. But they find that when they come to America, they can't stand this climate without it. And so they will eat some lamb or poultry. They will not eat beef. They will not eat pig meat. But they will eat some lamb. They find lamb inoffensive and poultry inoffensive to them, and some fish, you see. And merely because they cannot get accustomed to this climate without the benefit of some meat. However, there are many people here who get along beautifully without meat, and they do that by the correct substitution of foods that take the place of meat. And it's an easy thing to do. We will learn someday that certainly it's not justifiable to eat meat, but that will be a matter of our development. Can one ever make a decision if he successfully refrains from judging? Let's put it this way. He will never have to make a decision. The decision is made for him. If we approach a business problem and there is any sense of indecision, we need only acquaint ourselves with every aspect of the problem and then set it aside and wait for the decision to be made in us. In other words, for the conviction to come of which way to go. Then we do not have to make a decision. The decision is made within us. Or it sometimes acts in this way, that the proposition is so clear that there isn't any question about a decision. There's only one way to go, and you see it clearly. So it's not a decision would really be where there is indecision. Where there's a matter of this way or that way, there's a call for a decision. But when one is under divine guidance, usually there are not two ways. You automatically and quickly see the one and only way in which is right for that particular thing in that time. So there's no decision to make. Just a matter of doing what is so clearly evident to be the right thing to do. For instance, if we do not know what to do tomorrow, instead of searching around and making a decision, if we'll say, well, I'll wait until tomorrow, and whatever comes to me to do, I'll do, the decision is made for us. And that is more and more true as you come under cosmic guidance. There seems to be no reason for a decision. Some of our students have watched me during those periods. One of them was here last year in Honolulu, when I sat for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, not knowing what to do or where to go or when. And there was no use of my making a decision, because any decision I would have made would have been based on my thinking. And that would not necessarily have been the plan, the divine plan. And I really sweated out here. I just sat and sat here until one morning in my meditation, the voice said, be in New York in October, or what was it, October, November? Yes, October. No, November. And in London in December. Why it ever said that, I couldn't tell you, because I had no business in London. But that was what it said, and that is the way I arranged it. And I went to New York and had 4 classes in New York in November. Wasn't it December we went to London? And the beginning of December. Now, when I got to New York, the same thing happened, that I didn't know what date to go to London. And so when the classwork was over, I had nothing to do but sit in New York in the hotel and wait. I got up every morning and went for a walk on Fifth Avenue and looked at all the Christmas trimmings in the windows and did some window shopping. And each day I just waited and waited and waited. And the hotel bill was going on, but I was waiting. And then the voice came and said, go Wednesday. So I went right over and booked my passage and went Wednesday, you see. Now, if I had made the decision, I really don't see how I could have decided to go to London, because I had nothing to go there for. And even after I got there, I didn't know what I was there for. So I had to sit in the room in London and say, now, Father, I've obeyed, but what am I to do here? And the answer came again, well, you have some people over here who are studying your writings, let them know you're here. Send them a postal card. And I did. Well, you want to meet Mr. Hamlin? Go and meet Mr. Hamlin. And I did. And so each day something unfolded, and by the time I got through with my trip in London, another of my books had been accepted for publication. Still another book was accepted by another publisher. Since then, 3 more books have been accepted, and a lecture trip and a class has been arranged for over there. And you see what I mean? That it wasn't my decision. It was a decision that was made for me, and I've just trained myself to listen. Well, so it's been with these classes. Many of you here know how many times I have been asked to give a class in Honolulu. How many times, and how many students have asked for it. Never did I give one until 2 years ago. And never since until now. I've been here. Wouldn't do it. And why not? I don't know why not. Because if the time isn't right, the class can't be good. Humanly, yes, I know so many things that I've read that it could be interesting, but it couldn't be spiritually good. If the Lord build not the house, they labor in vain that build it. If the Lord keep not the watchman waketh but in vain. And if God weren't conducting this class, it might be humanly all right. My students might say, oh, it was a nice class. But that isn't what they've come here for. They've come here for spiritual experience. That's the whole object of this work, is spiritual experience, an actual acquaintanceship with God, a God experience. Now, how can I give that to anyone? Only God can give that to them. So when God says the moment is, that's when we have a class. Do you see that? So it is, and not before. And that's the way it's been across the whole United States. I never gave a class in New York City until last November. Never. Been 7 years with the Infinite Way, never gave a class till last November. Why? Heaven knows New York's a big enough city. There are enough students there that want it. But until the Father said go to New York, there was no going to New York. And so it's been in every bit of our work. And I do know this, that with business people it's the same. If they learn to depend on divine guidance, there's not much in the way of decision they have to make. They are faced with conditions that leave them no decision. This is the way, and this is the only thing you can do, and so you go ahead and do it. And if there is a choice, if there is a decision, this ability to rest back and say, not my will, but thine be done, usually brings about the right answer. But there too, it's training to learn to lean back on that infinite invisible and wait for its voice. And sometimes waiting can be a very uncomfortable thing. Now, healing is a very important activity in this work, and for this reason: by their fruits ye shall know them. The great question, the great answer that the Master gave to the question, art thou he that should come? He didn't say yes and he didn't say no. He said, go show John what things ye have seen. The sick are healed, the dead are raised. That is always the proof of a spiritual ministry. Are the sick being healed? Are the poor being fed? Are the dead, those dead in materiality, are they being raised up into some awareness of their spiritual identity, of spiritual living? That is the great concern. Now, if we had the most beautiful preaching in the world, or the most beautiful teaching in the world, but it didn't result in harmony of body, harmony of purse, harmony of morals, harmony of human relationships, if it didn't result in that, it would never be the answer to the Master's idea of spiritual ministry. Now, the goal in the work isn't primarily that sick people shall be made well, because sometimes a sick person becoming well makes them a victim of 7 more evils than they had in the beginning. In other words, a sick person who turns to God for healing and gets it may find themselves so free of sickness that they've got lots of time and inclination now to go out and have a good time, and just leave themselves open for worse things to come. The object is not of making of a religious, turning a religious teaching into just another healing agency. That it isn't. But a religious teaching should, by the very nature of its work, result in harmony of being and of body, and until the ultimate is achieved of complete freedom from material sense. Now, the degree of our healing work is dependent primarily on the practitioner. The practitioner has to assume the major responsibility. Why? Well, again, we pattern our work after that of the Master. When he was called upon to heal, he healed. There's no evidence that he healed everyone that came to him. There's merely evidence that he healed multitudes. That probably does not mean that he healed everyone who was in the multitude. But he healed multitudes, and he did better healing work than the disciples, because sometimes they had to bring their patients to him. And so we know that the higher the consciousness of an individual, the greater healing works they will do. That's number one. The fact that you cannot heal everyone in the multitude is because everyone is not constituted so as to respond to a spiritual impulse. I have seen in my work that there are many, many people who will respond to a mental practitioner. I mean by that, a practitioner who will sit down vigorously and declare, you are spiritual, you are perfect, you are God's perfect child, no harm can come nigh thy dwelling place, you are God's, and drive it in and drive it in and drive it in, And some people will respond beautifully to that, whereas that same person going to a spiritual practitioner, one who works entirely in the Spirit, may not respond. On the other hand, there are those who respond to a spiritual healer who will not respond to a mental healer. A mental healer will just get nowhere with them, and a spiritual healer will just, that simply, bring about a healing. So that there are conditions over which we do not have complete control. And it is for this reason that some people have instantaneous healings. Other people have very good healings, but not instantaneous ones. Others have more protracted healings. And still others do not yield at all. Now, when I say that the responsibility is primarily with the practitioner, I do not mean that the practitioner is responsible for the healing of everyone who comes to him, because that at the present time is absolutely impossible. It has just not been accomplished in this era. And there is no one to prove yes or no that it ever was so, because Scripture itself doesn't claim that the Master healed everyone. It merely points to the fact that he healed multitudes. Now, and of course, so far as anyone else is concerned, there isn't even a suspicion that anyone ever healed everyone. I think that Mrs. Eddy made the claim at one time that she healed 99% of those who came to her. But there again, you will have to not take that too literally, because with all the best intent in the world, it isn't possible to know whether or not you have healed even one person. I mean by that, supposing a person is brought to you with a serious disease, and the next day they're out of bed, and within a short time they're free of pain, and they get back to their work. Now, to all intents and purposes, you would call that a healing. But without diagnosis, without an actual proof of what has happened in the body, how do you know that something latent isn't there that may spring out at any time? No one's in a position to say that. It would be difficult to say even with a diagnosis, but without it, it would be an impossibility. In the same way, I have often been convinced when people have come to me with certain claims and then said they were healed, I have had an inner conviction that they never had that claim. As a matter of fact, I will tell you this. I personally don't believe half the women who've told me they've been healed of cancer, because I don't believe they had it. I really and truly believe that this universal fear of it is so great that the moment a woman feels a pain here, there, or the other place, she's sure it's cancer because she has all the symptoms. And then she'll call up or write you and tell you she's got cancer, and the next thing you know, she's healed. Well, I personally don't believe all of those. Now, it is in the same way that I am equally convinced that people have come at times with a simple headache or with indigestion or what seemed to be some simple thing, and I've had the conviction inwardly that there was something that the world would call serious that was met. Now, if I had to go, of course, before a court of law and swear to these things, I have no way of establishing that, nor have you. No one has. Yes, at one time, when Materia Medica was battling Mrs. Eddy, they asked her if she would conduct some healings and prove to them that they were healings, and she refused. Now, it wasn't because she had any less confidence in her healing ability, but she knew the great thing that the Master knew, and that now we have found out in this work, that very often if you raise them from the dead, nobody's going to believe it. We have seen too many fine healings only to have somebody say, well, you know, that probably would have happened anyhow, or, well, that's one of these miracles that sometimes happen, and so there's no way of convincing anyone. It's an unwise thing to think that just by having healings that you can convince someone of that fact. So that healing with us really doesn't mean going into competition with materia medica in any form. It means that as we come into this spiritual light, it must necessarily follow that disease drops away. Now, some of that is due to natural causes. For instance, there are many ills of the body that left to themselves would heal up anyhow. And very often people come even to metaphysical and spiritual practitioners with those ills, and they heal up of their own accord. And they are apt to give credit to the metaphysician, whereas actually they did not have a spiritual healing. They merely suffered it out until nature came to their rescue. There's a great deal of that in metaphysical healing work. And then there is the another point, that all diagnosis is not correct, and therefore people very often haven't got the things they think they have, and so healing takes place again without what you would call the direct intervention of the spirit or of spiritual understanding. And so no one is really equipped to talk about what percentage of healings they can have. This we can say, that probably 90% of the people who come to us are benefited, come to us with physical claims, are benefited. To what degree they are spiritual healings, or to what degree they are complete healings, would be an utter impossibility to make a matter of a record. Now, with that in mind, understand this, that wherever it is possible, wherever there are not influences that hinder, spiritual healing is effective. Spiritual healing is the most effective mode of healing that there is today. But it is like every form of healing. The allopath does not heal all his cases, and the homeopathy, is it homeopath, does not heal all of his cases. Nor probably does any form of materia medica. And probably for the same reason, that what cures one kills another. What is good for one is not good for another. And so in our work we have not found a cure-all in which we can say, oh yes, we can guarantee you a healing, or we can guarantee you a healing today, tomorrow, or next week. Now, all of this does not lessen the importance of spiritual healing, because every evidence that has come to my knowledge would show that those who come for spiritual healing really are benefited. Some are directly benefited, most of them, in the actual physical claims. Others receive their benefit through spiritual uplift, through a spiritual awareness of life, through entering an entirely different mode of living, and thereby bring about ultimately a change in their bodily and in their financial conditions. Now, because the patient or student knows nothing or very little of the method and mode of spiritual healing, for that reason then, when one undertakes the healing work, they should do it with the understanding that whatever is to be accomplished must be accomplished by my understanding or degree of spiritual unfoldment, and I must not expect the patient to carry their own burden of healing. Now, of course, there are those who will tell their patients, you must cooperate, or you must read so many pages of this textbook or that textbook every day, or you must go to church regularly, or you must do that, this, that, or the other thing. That does not work in the infinite way, and for this reason. Infinite way healing is based on this principle, that my kingdom is not of this world, and in my kingdom there are no discords. Disease does not exist as a reality. There is no such thing as a law of disease. There is a mathematical law, and because of that, 2 times 2 are always 4, and you cannot prove any exception to that rule. There is a law of music, of harmony, and it is for that reason that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do are always equal, always the same. And there is no way of violating that principle. And so it is with everything that has law, the law of like begetting like. You cannot find a single exception to that law. If it's white, it produces white. If it's black, it produces black. If you combine white and black, you get white and black. But you cannot violate the law of like begetting like. Orchids come from orchids, roses come from roses, and so on, all up and down the line. And if there is a law, that law is eternal. Now, if disease had a law, then disease would be eternal, and there would be no use of having a ministry, whether spiritual, mental, or physical, to set it aside. If disease had a law, the law would perpetuate the disease. And so it is that your practice in this work has to be based on that fact that discords and inharmonies are no part of the kingdom of reality. All right. Now, I would like you to see how this operates and follow me in it, but if you do not put it into practice this very night, there will be no way of next week remembering it and trying to do it then. If we are going to get busy with healing work, let's get busy with it tonight. And it makes no difference whether we fail or succeed in our early attempts. What counts is that we begin the actual practice so that as this principle unfolds, that we do get to a point where the work is effective. Now, the actual healing practice of the infinite way differs from that of all other metaphysical approaches. There is no metaphysical approach now known or now in literature that agrees with the infinite way method of healing. And the infinite way method of healing does not agree with Christian Science, Unity, or New Thought in their healing approach. And so it becomes necessary to understand what this principle is and get used to it so that you can bring it into an actual consciousness, an actual awareness, and follow it as a principle. Trying to mix it with other metaphysical approaches will not lead to success. This is a distinct principle, and any success that any of our students have had has come about only through abiding rigidly to this principle. Now, I'm going to give you, first of all, the one exception to what I've just said. That is, where the principle itself does not have to be known. And that is where an individual is so imbued with the Spirit of God as to have a natural healing ability, for them it is not necessary to know the principle of healing. Now, there are many people who have either come into this world with this gift and as they attained adulthood developed it and are now what is known as spiritual healers. They may know nothing at all of metaphysical truth. They may know nothing at all of spiritual truth. I met one such man in California. He was a physician, and he was a specialist in children's diseases and very well known. And they brought a boy to him, a 10-year-old boy with an incurable disease. And as he looked at this youngster, he recognized the fact that it was an incurable disease, and not only that, but that it had about run its course, and that it would not be long before this child would die. And a great feeling of, we call it compassion, pity, sympathy, whatever it is, love, flowed out from that man, and in that sense of love, he touched this boy on the head. And then right in front of his eyes saw the miracle take place, and the child healed. Well, he followed this history for some months and really saw an actual and complete healing of what he knew to be and what other doctors had diagnosed as this incurable disease. And so this doctor studied, read, and of course the only thing that he could turn to was the Bible, the only thing he could turn to at that time, and out of it came a healing ministry. He gave up his medical practice and became a spiritual healer. And he told me that he still does not know any metaphysical healing technique or practice, but this he knows, that in any moment when he comes to a recognition within himself that I can do nothing in this case, that something comes to him and takes it over, and it's met. But only in the degree that he can attain that feeling, and he said that was the feeling he had with his child. Isn't it a horrible thing, a beautiful child like this, and there's nothing we can do for it? Nothing. We're helpless. And in that moment of helplessness, the Spirit, or whatever it is that we call the divine power, took over and the healing took place, and that is his method of healing. Now, there are other people who go to Protestant churches and conduct healing campaigns, spiritual healers. It is very evident from their talks and their sermons that they know little or nothing of any spiritual or metaphysical or mental healing process. But they have received this gift of the Spirit, and they are able to speak the word or touch a patient and have response. Thereto, not one of them claims that they heal everyone who comes to them. They merely claim that they heal multitudes. They heal a lot of people, but not all of them. Now, if a person is gifted with a healing consciousness, then of course knowing the truth is unnecessary, or knowing a technique or knowing a principle is unnecessary. But otherwise, if one is to develop, I said develop, a healing consciousness, and one can develop a healing consciousness, it must be through a principle, a knowledge of a principle of healing which is practiced and practiced until it becomes an actual healing consciousness, a spiritual consciousness, and then no longer requires a technique or a mode or a principle. All right? The principle that we work from is this. Whenever a claim is presented to us, and now remember that it makes no difference whether it is physical, mental, moral, or financial. And likewise, it makes no difference if it is marital or if it is capital and labor, union trouble, employer-employee trouble. The principle is the same. There is not one principle for one type of healing and another principle for another. There is only one principle, and that is this. You start with the word God. Let us illustrate this. You say to me that you have a headache and you would like help. Now you have presented your problem to me. My principle is that I immediately forget you and the headache, and I turn within to myself with the word God. And I understand that God is infinite being, the only being, the all being. I go back to our principle of oneness. God is the only power. God is the only creative principle. God is the only law under this case. God is the only substance. God is the only activity. God is all there is to any case. God is the only reality. God being infinite, there is nothing apart from God. God is He, and God is she, and God is me, and God is God, and God is all there is, and God is the allness of all being. As you fill yourself with the realization of the nature of God as fulfillment, as God as the principle of life, the soul of life, as you fill yourself with God as the only law. God is a lawgiver. And if God is a lawgiver, then God is the law that the lawgiver gives, and the law must be spiritual. God is spirit, the lawgiver is spirit, the law must be spiritual. And so you abide right up there in that truth. Now, as you continue in that realization of God until you come to a period where no more thoughts will come, you're finished. Now is where you begin the second part of your work. Now is when you declare to yourself, well, that's all the truth I know, now let's see what God knows. And that is when you get very still, adopt a listening attitude, and wait as if you were waiting for God to speak, God to lead, God to direct. And you may get an answer, and you may not. If you do not get some signal, some sign that the work is done, then the thing to do is stop for the time being, and an hour or two later go back to it, or 3 or 4. And if again you do not get the answer, if you do not get an inner assurance, go back to it again, an hour later, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours later. Wake up in the middle of the night and go back to it again until you do get a signal within you, something that tells you all is well. Now, it may come in words, but it may not. It may just come in a sense of release, or what I call a click, a deep breath like that, and then you feel, oh, well, it's all done. Now, when you do, you may find, and usually will find, that the healing has taken place. But if not, if the patient calls the next day and says, no, I'm not better, in fact, I might even be worse, you can go right back to your same practice and go through another day. And you will find that some cases will yield quickly and some you will have to continue with until whatever reason there is for delayed healing has been removed. Now, this is the beginning of this type of healing work. It is not the ultimate. The ultimate comes when none of this knowing of the truth is necessary, because your second stage comes when you have eliminated that first part of the work, when you no longer have to know the truth, when you can automatically sit down, immediately get silent, and listen. Then there's no need for that preliminary step of knowing the allness of God, because you know it so thoroughly you don't have to rehearse it. Now you're at a place where you can eliminate that first part and merely take up the second part, which is the listening until you get that answering response within you. And then, of course, the third stage and final one is when you don't need either of those two. When the person reaching out to you gets their response without your even knowing that they have reached out to you, or without you consciously having done anything about it. You see, the final stage of spiritual development is when there is no conscious thought-taking, when everything is an automatic activity of the Spirit. I was invited in Chicago to hear Dr. Jones give his class. He gives a class once a month to 50 physicians, and the class is on spiritual healing. And on this particular day, he had a new class formed, and he explained to them that whatever mode of practice you are now having, whether allopathy or chiropractic or these other forms, that is where you must practice at this moment. And then he went on to illustrate, I don't know whether it is osteopathy or chiropractic, that these doctors, in handling their cases, at first used physical pressure, used physical force with their hands and arms to do whatever manipulating was done. Then he said, as you go on, as you go further, you surely know that you use less and less of physical force, and you come to a place where a very light touch does the same work. And then he said, I'm going to lead you to where you are not even going to touch your patient physically, you're going to do it mentally, and then I'm going to take you to the final stage where you don't even do anything mentally, but the entire thing is done by the action of the Spirit. And so you see, they have that same realization that in the end it is not by might nor by power, but that there is a Spirit of God that works through them, which is the actual healing agency. So it is. We at first have what you would call the mental process, not the mental process of new thought, which is the declaration of truth to a patient, but this is merely, and never in our work do you know any truth about a patient. Never do you take a patient's name into your thought, nor their disease into your thought. Never do you think of a mental cause. In this work, you take only God into your treatment, and the only truth you ever know is the truth that you know about God. Now, as you fill yourself with this truth about God, and remember, that's not the healing agency. That is merely your own assuring of yourself, so that you lift yourself to a place where your mind can be still. After you've gotten the full assurance of God as the all and only, Then you have no more fear for your patient. Now you can be still and listen. And the healing agency is when that answer comes to you within you, when you feel that click, when you feel that release, or when you get an actual message. Now remember this, that it is no more unusual for God to speak to us than it is for us to speak to each other. It is only that in our past life we have not become accustomed to the idea, we have not been taught that, and so we have not trained ourselves to listen. But be assured of this, and I can only say it to you because for 25 years I've demonstrated that it's true, that God is available to us as we are to each other. It is only a matter of communion until the contact is established. Once it's established, you can go to God and speak to God in the same way that you would speak to a practitioner or teacher. And in my experience, I have found it wise once in a while to get a little mad with God and tell him I'm getting impatient, and please come on and treat me a little better. Now, that is not meant, of course, to influence God. That is merely to get myself out of the way and to make sure that I'm not standing in my own light. And so, because I can't fight with myself, I have to fight with the only other one who's around, and usually that's God. And so I do once in a while, not too often, but I do once in a while sit right down and talk to God in that way and say, look, if we're going to get along together, it's got to be some way better than this, because this isn't a good partnership right now, so let's get together on this. And then that's out of my system. Then I can say, all right, now I'm ready to listen. Or that may only be a part of my humanhood, probably is. But what difference does it make? Any treatment we give is only part of our humanhood, because none of it is ever going to influence God. None of it is ever going to get God to act. It is only going to get us, some way or other, into divine alignment. Now, I knew one practitioner who accomplished the same thing by playing piano. She would just go to the piano and play and play and play till she was worn out. Then she'd sit down and be ready for God to talk to her. And so each one has a different way. Others sit and read a Bible or read their favorite metaphysical books. That lifts them into a spirit, and then they're on the receiving end of the Spirit. Now let us see this. In your beginning, please do not hesitate to use what we call the argument, that is, the knowing of the truth. Only be sure that you never know any truth except the truth you know about God. Never bring your treatment down to the level of a patient, and never take them into your thought. Never try to heal them. Never try to improve them. Never try to reform them or change them. Leave your patient alone. You go into God and get as close to God as you can. Then get silent and let this response come to you. When, after a few years, you have gotten yourself to a point where it is automatic never to look down here for good or evil, where it's just automatic to know that everything flows from God, then you eliminate that first part, or it eliminates itself, and all you've got to do when called upon for help is this listening. Now, this is the point in the infinite way that separates it from what is called absolute teachings. You may hear a lot about absolute teachings, but don't ever believe that the infinite way is one of them. It definitely isn't. Now, this is the point that separates it. When you are called upon for help, you must recognize this fact. There is no such thing as an erroneous person. There is no such thing as an erroneous condition. Why? Because God made all that was made, and all that God made is good, And anything God did not make wasn't made. So you might as well know to begin with that in all this world there is not an erroneous person, there's not a diseased person, there's not a dead person, nor is there any other type of person except the person that God made in His own image and likeness. Now what are you dealing with? Since you're not dealing with a person and you're not dealing with an evil condition, you are dealing with an appearance, or you are dealing with a temptation to see a selfhood apart from God, or an activity or a condition apart from God. We have three names that we use: claim, appearance, or temptation. This is a claim of a selfhood apart from God, or it is a claim of an activity apart from God, or it is a claim of a selfhood apart from God. Or if you don't think of it as a claim, then you can think of it as an appearance. Remember, this isn't a sick person, this isn't a sinful person, this is the appearance of a person apart from God. This is an appearance of a condition apart from God. This is an appearance of a law apart from God. Or you can use the word temptation. This is a temptation to believe that there are two powers, a good power and an evil power. This is a temptation to believe that there are two laws, spiritual laws and some other kind of laws. This is a temptation to believe that there is the image and likeness of God and a mortal being. So, as part of your knowing this truth about God, you also have this which we call in the infinite way knowing the nature of error. Now, it doesn't mean knowing the nature of disease. It doesn't mean knowing the nature of sin. It doesn't mean knowing the nature of an evil person. No. To know the nature of error means to know that what is appearing as sick or evil person, or what is appearing as sin or disease, is but a claim, a temptation, or an appearance. Now then, unless you know this, you will be struggling to make a sick person well or a bad person good, and you will lose out. You will not succeed. You cannot succeed in that way. There is no way to succeed in a spiritual ministry by accepting first an evil and then trying to do something about it. There's no way to accomplish it. The practice must be based entirely on the first chapter of Genesis, in which you agree God made all that was made, and all that God made is good. Now, it is true, someone says, oh, let's walk down the street and let me show you some cemeteries and hospitals. Oh yes, I haven't ever denied the existence of those. I have denied the reality of them, but not the existence of them. They exist without any question of doubt. That's why there was a Christ ministry. The sick are healed, the dead are raised. Certainly they exist so far as appearance is concerned, so far as universal belief is concerned, so far as our human sense of things is concerned, but they do not exist in God's kingdom. And my kingdom is not of this world. Now my kingdom, the spiritual kingdom, or kingdom of the Christ, is a kingdom in which there is no sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation. There is no mortality, and there are no mortal conditions. And healing work is brought out by our recognition of that fact. Our recognition of that fact. Now that is why when people write me that they would like to become a practitioner, or they have the desire to heal and be a healer, I write back to them, please don't, because you're going to be a failure. And they can't understand that. How do I know in advance they're going to be a failure? Well, they can't miss. There isn't any way for them to miss. They're starting out with the assumption that there's an evil world around, and they are going to open an office and do something about it. They can't succeed that way. That is why no one should ever be in this practice or in this teaching work until they have come to a place where they have no desire to be a practitioner or a teacher, where they're forced into it and kept into it by a power beyond themselves. Nobody else should ever be in this work. And I tell our students, for heaven's sakes, please, please don't come into it. Please don't have it. I don't want to see any practitioners. I don't want to see any teachers. Then here and there comes that individual who is driven by the Spirit, who sees so clearly the real nature of the spiritual kingdom that they're drawn in and forced in, and they're kept in, and very often against their will.